All right, we're going to try something a little bit different today. This is going to be a special. So this is still Poets and Depression, but this is the special episode. So it's Pulling the Thread, episode 1. Um, and you'll also find this as a blog on my website. It's the very first issue that I wrote called What Rules? And so Pulling the Thread, it came about from threads. Yes, the title is kind of a pun. But it came about the idea of those conversations that you have on threads, or the conversations you have with other people, with friends, with coworkers, colleagues, and stuff like that. As you're talking about things, and you want to dive into a little bit more, and you get into a little bit more, and so that's where it came from, really. And so this first one came from talking to other people about rules and advice and like why they write. And I'm really active on threads. I have been. I'm not quite as active as when I first started, but that's probably a good thing. I've kind of balanced out. I've kind of leveled out. I found a good happy place, really. Especially doing what I do with subtext, which I should be having another issue coming out sometime this month. It'll be on a Sunday, but right now. I'm doing at least one episode, one issue of subtext a month. I've got some great people lined up. I'm really excited to get to it and get to the next people, but that'll come, and you'll see it first on Threads, and I'll share it on Instagram and on my website when it does come out. But so all this stuff came from Threads, really, and I thought more and more about it, and I was like, I need to talk. I need more space to talk about these things, and so I pulled things over to my website, and I started pulling the thread. I started doing subtext. I started this podcast, Poets and Depression, and that's kind of where it came from. But talking about these conversations and interacting with these people and talking more and more about rules and advice and why people write, there's something that really bothered me. And the thing is, a lot of people shied away from writing poetry or stories or exploring art because they didn't feel like they were good enough, or that they didn't understand the rules. They didn't want to try and muddle through it. And that's like something that really bothers me. And I encourage people to just go for it. Just write, just paint, just do whatever, just dive headfirst into your art. Like, if a rule is going to keep you from writing, there are no rules. That's been my whole idea behind this, because the secret, like the real secret of creative writing is that there aren't really any rules. I mean, you've got guidelines, you've got stuff like that you need to worry about and things like that, but really, like, if something works on a basic level and you don't know what you're doing, does it matter if you followed any rules or not? Like, do you think, F. Scott Fitzgerald or Emerson or any of them, Dickens, whoever, whatever, do you think any of them really cared that much? Like, some of them kind of broke some rules, or broke some rules, quote unquote. So I've always been really bothered by that people, like, they kind of gatekeep with the idea of rules. And I know a lot of people, and a lot of people on threads, that shied away from writing or exploring art because they didn't feel like they were good enough, or really they didn't feel like they understood the rules enough. And it's just like, I've seen this in college. I've seen this beyond college. It's very common, especially when people are first starting to think about it. It's like, oh, when I want to paint, like if I was going to go out and go paint, and I wanted to learn how to paint, I'd go out and I'd buy paintbrushes, the paint, the canvas, and I'd just start. I'd probably figure out the stuff later, but like, if I let the rules get in the way of like, oh, I shouldn't do this or I shouldn't do that, then I probably won't even get started. So like, just start. It's more, for me, it is far more important that there is more art in the world, that people enjoy art, that people enjoy poetry. Like, I am emphatic about poetry. You'll find that out about me if you don't know that about me already. Poetry is the biggest thing. But to think that people can be turned away because they don't know what the rules are, like, that's where I say, just don't think there are any rules. And, you might be thinking, like, if there are rules, aren't they important? Should they be followed? And advice from professional writers seems like it'd be smart to listen to. And both thoughts are totally justified, but they're not entirely true. If you're familiar with the writing world, or if you take any type of creative writing classes, you're probably going to hear two of them that are really, really big and really, really important. The first one is Rule 1, show, don't tell. The second one is Rule 2, write what you know. I'm calling the Rule 1 and Rule 2 because they're the ones to really talk about. But so the first rule, show don't tell, is kind of preached as a type of gospel. It's the rule and advice that you will hear every single time you ask a writer group what you should be doing. It's the number one rule you should follow, and you'll most assuredly hear show don't tell. But ask them what's meant by that. I bet that is a harder question for them to answer. Like, it's a mantra that is easier for them to preach, but less easy for them to say, to give what it is. Or you might get the typical, you have to show, you can't just say he was angry. You have to say his veins bulged in his forehead and his eyes were threatening to escape from their sockets. And honestly, either are fine, but both for different reasons. Like, it's okay to just say he was angry, or it's okay to exemplify, to expound on it and to be kind of prosy about it. Like, it depends on what your end goal is. And honestly, again, if it's going to stop you from writing, just write he was angry and move on. You can always edit and revise later if it doesn't work. And like I was just getting to, there are plenty of situations where simply telling something is okay. Exposition is not something to be afraid of. Exposition is necessary. But too many latch onto the idea that show don't tell as if they must show everything. And if you actually do show everything, reading just turns into an absolute slog. Think about times you've read a book where something was just full of flowery exposition and constantly showing just everything. It's horrible, it's tedious, and it can turn people off from reading and writing. And a good mix of the two is ideal. But to think it's an absolute rule? Look at any number of the famous and well-known authors and poets out there. See what they do. I can guarantee you they all don't just show. In fact, I can promise that some of them only tell. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. If it works, it works. Don't let it stop you. And then that's not to discredit the concept of show, don't tell. It can be incredibly helpful. Like, I get that. I won't deny that. But my point is, don't let it stop you from writing. Tell the story you want. Write the poem that you want. I struggled with this when I began writing poetry, and that I felt I always had to use vibrant and concrete and stunning imagery that I had to continuously push for each poem. I have learned to relax. And by relax, I mean I realized that rules aren't really rules. A poem doesn't have to always be all punchy images or just punchy images. Like, it doesn't have to be all or just, like the poetry can be in the words, it can be the exposition, it can be the emotion. It can be just as powerful to state something as it can be to have a super detailed image. Telling can supplement and power up the image, and the image can supplement and power up the telling. So that's show don't tell. It's still a big one, always going to be a big one, but people just don't understand it. And the biggest thing is just write. Now, the second rule I talk about is write what you know. And this next one is one I didn't really understand until just a few months ago when I was starting to talk to my therapist and I was starting to deal with my depression. The rule of advice was something I'd always heard when I first started writing back in high school. And it was write what you know. It's a simple concept, a simple statement, but it was never fully explained. And maybe that was the problem, maybe that was the issue, but I feel like it's never fully explained. And it was this kind of amorphous idea that you write from your own personal experience. And then, of course, as a teenager in high school and going to college, I thought, what experiences? I was a quiet kid. I stayed to myself. I was a nerd. What of interest did I have to talk about? It's not like, oh, I went and down to the fishing hole and fished today, so I'm going to write about fishing. It's not really what it's about. And so I wrote about anything but myself. I wrote in the third person. I wrote about places and magical creatures and others that I had no attachment to. And I didn't start writing in the first person until in college. And my professor told me that I did that kind of backwards, that most people tended to start in the first person because it was easier to write about themselves before branching out. And here's the thing, as it turns out, I was writing what I knew, I just didn't know it at the time. Because writing what you know isn't about personal experiences or memories or what have you. My writing about the other and about emotions and feelings inside myself is writing what I knew. And I didn't feel like I had a self to write about. Depression and other things now getting resolved and managed. If anyone ever needs to talk about anything, I'm here, get a hold of me. And I mean that. My username is the same everywhere for a reason. It's so people can find me, it's so people can reach out to me. My email is jacob@kolosh.com. It's not hard. But so I felt like I didn't have a self to write about. So I wrote about everything outside of myself. That's what I knew. And that's what influenced what I wrote. And even then, the depression that I wasn't dealing with was still very much influencing what I wrote. You'll hear about this in an upcoming episode of a main episode of Poets and Depression, episode number 5. When I talk about the poem, it keeps you in the basement. It's a lot of writing what you know. It's just you don't know it kind of thing, So most people, maybe a gross generalization, writing what you know is a good starting place for people. If you have a good memory about something, or not even a really good one, it can inform your work. It provides a solid base, and it helps you get comfortable with writing about emotions and writing about different scenes and different things. It's that kind of starting point. It's the point where you take off. But eventually you don't have to use that launch pad because you've learned to write what you need. And so it's a rule or a piece of advice that is never truly explained. and it serves to help kickstart your journey, but then you don't need to follow it like a gospel either. And the write what you know is always such a tricky one. Because, like I said, it's like, oh, write what you know. Okay, well, what do I know? I know about staying at home and playing video games. It's not really a good place to start from. I want to write about dragons and fantasy and magic, and I don't know anything about that, so I'm just going to make it up. But the fact is, you're always going to end up writing what you know, in the sense that your personal life, your feelings, your emotions, your mental health, your relationships, your friendships, your enemies, that is all going to impact and influence how you write. That is what you know. It's not the places, it's not the things, it's not the events. It's the emotions and the experiences behind them. I'm sure you know what a breakup is like. I'm sure you know what losing a friend is like. If you write about that in a book, you're going to be able to write about it. That's writing what you know. And so even then, it's like, and that's where I say, like, the whole rules thing, that they're taught and they're shown the wrong way sometimes. And so don't feel like you have to get stuck thinking about what something is, because that's going to prevent you from writing. And that's the whole thing. That's what it all comes down to. That's what it all boils down to. That's why I always say there are no rules, because if it's going to stop you from writing, don't let it stop you. Just start writing. You can figure it all out later. I could go on and on and on and on and on and on, and I may even expound some of these later, and I think I did. Maybe I haven't. I don't remember. But, yeah, so when it comes to creative writing, my number one opinion is there are no rules. Do not let anything hold you back from trying to write that first poem, that first story, that first book, whatever you want to write, or paint, or take a picture of. You can learn this stuff later. Because obviously, like photography, there are some rules that you need to follow. In painting, there's some rules that you need to follow. In writing, there are rules you need to follow. Like, look at it more like the Pirates of the Caribbean. They're more like guidelines. You know? Guidelines. Get out there, write, be creative. Don't let a rule or the idea of a rule stop you.